Frank Dawson stepped wearily off the city bus, pulled a damp handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his brow. It was the 5th straight day of relentless heat, an unusual scorcher for Michigan. After pausing to catch his breath, the heavy-set man slowly made his way toward the wooded outskirts of town, where the crematorium with the ominous name Ash to Ashes was tucked away. Frank had been working there as a night guard for 2 years now, ever since he left the factory. Age was catching up with him, and his health had started to decline. Tired of the daily grind, he had taken the easier job, even if it paid a lot less. But that didn't bother him. His kids were grown, and his needs were modest. With no more heavy lifting than a cup of coffee, life had become manageable. As he rounded the corner of the old white brick building, he was surprised to find his co-worker Mike, with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, nervously smoking near the door and staring out toward the trees. Frank approached and reached out to shake his hand. Mike returned the gesture but said nothing, lighting another cigarette right after finishing the first. Mike just gave a slow nod. Frank asked, "You okay? You seem off." "Come on, spill it. You're clearly shaken." Mike looked around as if to make sure they were alone, then leaned in and whispered, "Frank, don't think I've lost it, but I heard screams in the furnace room last night. Human screams." "Man, you scared me. That's just the local kids. While you were on vacation, they came around yelling and playing pranks a couple times." "Goddamn, thought I was losing it." "All right, take care, Frank." And with that, Mike took off toward the nearest bus stop. Frank stepped into the building and entered the security room just off the main hall. He cursed under his breath when he saw the overflowing trash and dirty floor, not because of Mike, but because of Billy, the facility's janitor/everything else. The guy was known for being lazy and always smelled like last night's whiskey. Still, no one fired him. Who else would work 3 jobs for minimum wage? Frank dropped his bag on the battered old couch and plopped down in the squeaky office chair. The room was nothing special, just a fridge, microwave, kettle, small desk with a landline phone, a radio, and a shelf stacked with worn-out books. His black security jacket hung on the chair, with a patch on the sleeve that read "Night Guard Security," surrounding an embroidered medieval knight. Frank had no idea who Night Guard was, and honestly, he didn't care. The company only handled morgues, cemeteries, and this one lonely crematorium. The kettle clicked off, and Frank made himself a strong cup of coffee. From his bag, he pulled out a pack of peanut brittle bars, his guilty pleasure. He was overweight, sure, but didn't care. He loved food way more than he ever cared for dating. After finishing his snack and updating the logbook, Frank checked the day's Schedule 1 cremation today. Ceremony at noon, cremation at 2, still hours to go. He pulled out his favourite detective novel, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, and got lost in the pages. He was snapped back to reality when the front door slammed and a voice called out. Frank pointed the visitor toward the viewing room and stashed his book away. The morticians were late, as usual, but when they finally brought in the coffin, Frank was surprised to see a young woman inside. She couldn't have been more than 20. He pretended to do his job, but eavesdropped on the guests. Her name was Julia, and according to the family, she had gone out for school one morning and then disappeared. Days later, they got a call from the morgue. The cause of death? A sudden stroke. She'd been found collapsed in a city park. The oddest part, the coroner insisted on cremation. The family seemed confused, but went along with it. Once the farewell ended, they moved Julia to the furnace room. The family would pick up her ashes in 2 days. By 8 p.m., the last staff member had gone. Frank locked up and returned to his book. The radio buzzed quietly beside him. A few hours later, he realized something was off. The radio was hissing. He fiddled with the dial but couldn't find a single station. Finally, annoyed, he unplugged the damn thing. After dinner, microwaved a burger, Frank checked the building and locks, then settled onto the couch. That night he dreamed of Julia. Julia's voice echoed in her mind. "It's hot! I'm burning!" When she suddenly ran at him with flaming hands, he woke up screaming. He wiped the sweat off his face, but then heard it again. A scream, not from the dream, from inside the building. Grabbing his flashlight, baton and taser, Frank ventured out. "Damn kids," he muttered, cursing loud to scare them. But the screams came again, from behind him, from the furnace room. Frank stormed in, but it was silent. He turned to leave and heard a muffled sob. Coming from Julia's furnace, he crept closer. The crying stopped. Curious, Frank leaned in and pressed his ear to the warm metal. A shriek blasted from inside. The gas ignited in every furnace. Flames roared. Frank fell back, screaming, "It's hot! I'm burning!" The fire danced like writhing bodies in pain. Frank fled to the security room and grabbed the phone. But instead of a dial tone, a woman's voice whispered, "It's hot! I'm burning!" Then more voices joined in, "We're burning!" He dropped the receiver and stumbled back, only to hear the unplugged radio hiss again, then a scream, the sound of cracking bones, fire, agony. "Help me!" Julia's voice echoed. Frank curled on the floor, hands over ears, sobbing. Then silence. He lowered his hands. Everything was off. He reached for the landline, but hesitated. He pulled out his cell. No signal. Then a knock on the window. He looked. At first, nothing, but then Julia's black hair rising slowly above the sill, her face. She whispered through smoky lips, "Help me," before sinking back into the dark. Frank dropped to the floor. 10 minutes passed before he could move. Then he ran. Not bothering with his shift, he bolted out the building. But just as he stepped outside, a clunk echoed behind him. He turned. A familiar burnt flesh smell filled the air, and there she was, 1 meter away, reaching out. Frank ran like hell, faster than he had in decades, toward the back exit. He made it to the viewing room, then candles flared to life. Julia stepped into the light. Frank collapsed, but the dead didn't attack. They simply stood, watching. Julia raised her hand, pointed to her throat, then her stomach. Frank, in disbelief, unbuttoned her shirt and saw no autopsy marks. She had never been dissected. The ghost turned and left. 3 days later, Frank returned. This time, Mike seemed shaken. 2 hours into his shift, another body arrived, a young man. Once alone, Frank opened the coffin. No autopsy scar. Someone yelled behind him, but Frank called the man over. Together they stared. An ambulance was called. The dead man was alive, barely breathing, skin cold, pulse almost undetectable. Turned out a coroner had been injecting victims with a paralyzing venom from a stolen Haitian toad, a fake death, and he cremated them alive. Frank's discovery stopped the killer just in time to save the third victim. When asked what it felt like, the survivor said, "We felt everything, but we couldn't move, couldn't scream." The coroner was sentenced to life in prison, and Frank, he kept the job. But every time a new body came in, Frank would ask, "Did they do the autopsy?" Thank you for staying with me until the end. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next video.